You know you can't trust this president to do what's right for this country. You can trust he will do what's right for Donald Trump.
House Democrats wrap up their opening arguments in the impeachment trial of U.S. President Donald Trump. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. The 7 House Democrats leading the prosecution of Donald Trump have concluded their opening arguments on Friday. The main allegation revolves around the president withholding military aid to Ukraine, a U.S. ally, posing a threat to national security of the United States. The administration has refused to turn over documents and blocked government witnesses from testifying. Well, there is much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Amy Holmes is in New York. She's a political commentator and columnist for the Swiss weekly Die Weltwoche. Leonard Steinhorn is a political analyst and professor of communication at history at American University, right here in Washington, D.C. And also with us are my colleague, CGTN's White House correspondent, Nathan King. Nathan, we just heard there from Adam Schiff. He's the lead Democrat impeachment manager. Let's hear him again in his closing argument.
The threat that he will continue to abuse his power and cause grave harm to the nation over the course of the next year until a new president is sworn in or until he would be reelected is not hypothetical. Merely exposing the president's scheme has not stopped him from continuing this destructive pattern of behavior that has brought us to this somber moment. He is who he is. That will not change.
So Nathan, listening there to those comments from Adam Schiff, how effective has the Democrats' impeachment manager been in making the case against Donald Trump?
Well, as you said in your intro there are 7 House impeachment managers. Yeah. I think most Democrats would like there to be 1, and that's Adam Schiff. He has a way of distilling this very complicated story and every single document and every single twist and turn in a way that is made for soundbite television. The problem is the medium is the message, isn't it? And Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, has sort of ruled that you can only have this one fixed camera position for the whole trial. And, you know, we've had 9 hours of testimony some days, so it's pretty boring. In fact, I've actually given up watching it, and I listen to it.
Right.
Because only then can you actually really sort of hang on the words. And, you know, we've seen from the political sketches all around town that people are shuffling in their seats and they're not used to being without their phones. So, you know, he's a very, very effective prosecutor. But we've already seen a lot of this in the House Intelligence Committee. So what they've essentially been doing is rerunning everything in slow motion so that senators do not have an excuse for saying, I didn't know the facts, we need to know more, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the hope is here not to acquit President Trump. We know that's probably not going to happen. It would take 20 Republicans to move. But to force enough Republicans in a week or so's time to try and bring in more witnesses like John Bolton and others who have been a bit testy about testifying. And that's where the real damage could be done to US President Trump, who won't be removed from office, but has to run again for re-election in November.
Amy Holmes, Adam Schiff's broad argument, as we just heard there, is that Donald Trump has damaged the United States during the past 3 years, and if he's not removed from the White House, he'll continue to damage the United States for the rest of his term in office. They also say that he is a threat to national security. Has he damaged the United States in the past 3 years? Is he a threat to national security?
Well, I think that those are campaign arguments that will be decided by the voters in November of 2020 of this year. What I heard from Adam Schiff was really a campaign speech, a little bit of psychoanalyzing that Donald Trump is Donald Trump. He's the same person he'll always be. I think everybody agrees with that. As far as was this effective, well, the Constitution requires that 66 senators vote to acquit. Adam Schiff did not make any dent in getting toward that number. And just as a small point of fact about the camera angle on the United States Senate. I used to be the speechwriter for the Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist for the Senate floor, and that camera position is actually fixed by Senate rules, not by Mitch McConnell, not by any partisan decision making. It's a bane of TV producers
Not true, but
everywhere
anyway,
that it doesn't pan and it doesn't go back and forth. So watching, Adam make his, Congressman Schiff make his pitch to the American public, I can tell you there weren't any standing ovations. In fact, ratings have gone steadily down.
Lenny, what do you make of the past week's proceedings? Have the Democrats advanced their cause? We know more or less what the outcome of this is going to be. The president's not going to be convicted, if anything. We hear that the intention is to damage his re-election prospects. Have they succeeded, the Democrats, in doing that?
Well, the Senate may be a court, but the real court that the Democrats are playing for right now is the court of public opinion, and that really does translate to November ahead. I think what they're looking to do is to tell a story about a president who sees himself as above the law, who sees himself as unaccountable, who may well, if he is acquitted, do anything within his power because he feels that there is nobody there to check his power, to check his impulses, and to check his desires and his self-interest. So I think what the Democrats want to do is to paint a portrait of the president, to lay it out to the American people, and to hope that a critical sector of the voting public, those independents, those persuadables, those suburban women who the Democrats are hoping to keep in their fold because they voted for the Democratic Party in 2018, will say, I'm just tired of this president. I don't want to deal with this person anymore. He is not what I imagine a president of the United States to be, and I think that is exactly what they're playing for right now.
Larry, just one point on what you were saying there. Has this process, the impeachment process, which is part of the Constitution to act as a check and balance on any abuse of power by the president, has it effectively been hijacked by the Democrats and is now being used as a campaign tool?
Well, not if you think that he committed an act that abused the public trust, violated the Constitution, or arguably undermined the integrity of the presidency.
Right.
If you believe that this president used the power of his office to leverage a foreign country to investigate his political enemy, you think that is impeachable. So if you think that's impeachable, you are obligated, and it's necessary for you to go forth with that case and to make your argument.
But that's a subjective judgment, isn't it?
Well, anything in politics is subjective judgment, and in fact, so what a prosecutor does is to build a case, to bring it before a jury, and to hope that the jury is going to be impartial enough to be able to make their decisions based on that. That's the case with the court of law. The difference here right now is that it's not really a jury, as we like to imagine it, of 12 impartial people. These are 100 people with political loyalties in a deeply partisan culture, and in all likelihood, you know, there's about a 0% chance that the Democrats will be able to get those 67 votes. But let's put it this way. If the roles were reversed and this were a Democratic president doing this, you might see the exact same partisanship flipped.
Right.
So.
All right, let's bring in Aaron MATÉ. He's a contributing writer for The Nation magazine and host of Pushback with Aaron MATÉ. Aaron, great to see you. What do you make of the impeachment process so far?
I understand the desire to hold Donald Trump accountable. I personally hope that he's defeated in 2020. But I think that this whole thing is a huge mistake. I think Democrats are proceeding on a very weak case. And just like Russiagate, which, as we know now, was a massive failure, they're doing so by empowering really dangerous Cold War and dangerous and delusional Cold War rhetoric. So take Adam Schiff. His main contention is that Donald Trump endangered national security because he briefly froze some military funding to Ukraine. Well, by that logic, then Barack Obama committed a much worse offense than Donald Trump, because throughout Barack Obama's presidency, not just for a couple of months in the case of Donald Trump, but throughout Obama's presidency, he resisted heavy bipartisan pressure, and he rejected sending that same military aid to Ukraine. He refused to send it because Obama did not want to further inflame the proxy war in Ukraine that his administration helped start. And he also worried about those weapons, those U.S. weapons, falling into the hands of far-right forces inside of Ukraine, which is a very real concern. So already on the face of it, Schiff's main assertion that Trump endangered national security is a joke. And then he talks about how Trump also threatened the integrity of the 2020 elections. Does anyone seriously think that if Ukraine had announced an investigation into Burisma and into allegations that Ukrainians meddled in 2016 to benefit Hillary Clinton, does anybody think that that would seriously undermine the integrity of 2020? So we have to ask, who really is sowing doubt about the integrity in our elections? I think Adam Schiff and the Democrats are doing a pretty good job of it by pushing hysterical warmongering about how we need to arm Ukraine to fight Russia, and also warning that somehow an announcement of an investigation would somehow undermine a U.S. election. To me, it's just a transparent joke.
Well, and to add to Aaron's point about Adam Schiff's argument on national security, he made a very wild claim that we needed to arm Ukraine to fight against Russia so that we would not be fighting Russia over here, as if the movie Red Dawn is about to start in theaters this weekend, that Russian forces might be invading the United States and we need the Ukrainians to push them back in Eastern Europe. I mean, this was just a really wild and unsupported analysis.
Nathan, what do you make of that? I mean, are those weak arguments?
I mean, there are so many different opinions you can have. I'm just going to play devil's advocate because, I mean, a lot of the stuff we're hearing out of New York is questionable at best. First of all, of course, an investigation into Joe Biden affects the 2020 election because if there's mud that sticks, they didn't even actually want an investigation, they wanted an announcement of an investigation. Yeah. If mud sticks during the primaries, he doesn't become the candidate. So therefore he's out of the way. You run against a socialist like Bernie Sanders, that could still happen. And if suddenly there's an investigation and there is some mud on his son, well, we've seen it replay. We saw it in 2016 with the Hillary email stuff. Now there wasn't, maybe there was a there, maybe there wasn't a there. But it was definitely a factor in the election. So anyone who says that it can't be a factor in the 2020 election has obviously been...
I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
Oh, you did.
No, I didn't.
You just...
I said...
How about, Aaron, do you just let me finish? And then you can come in. Thank you. So you know, anyone who says that this couldn't affect the 2020 election has been hibernating for 4 years. Okay. So essentially, you know, there's that. Now, about the Russian thing, we all know that Russia is waging a proxy war in Ukraine. We know that. Now, is it something that's in the U.S. foreign policy interest to back Ukraine and bring it into the West and increase the NATO advance into Eastern Europe, which is ill-judged by many, including myself? That's a question, but it is stated U.S. policy. And Congress voted for the money. The money was actually meant to be released by law. If it wasn't released, it would have gone. In fact, some of it didn't actually make it. Okay. So those are actual facts.
Yeah, okay. Aaron, go ahead.
Okay. I didn't say that an announcement by Ukraine of an investigation into Burisma wouldn't have an impact. It would have an impact.
Did actually, but anyway, it's fine.
No, excuse me.
We've heard it.
No, okay, no.
Okay, well,
now you're false. Okay. I'm going to continue now, and I appreciate if you can let me speak. What I said was Adam Schiff was calling into question that the whole integrity of the entire U.S. election if an investigation was announced. He said that can we be sure that our votes are going to be respected if Donald Trump's scheme succeeds? So he's calling into question the integrity of the entire election, which is far different than it having an impact. Look, we already have an example of what kind of impact it might have. Back in 2018, a court in Ukraine ruled that actually Ukrainian officials had improperly interfered in the U.S. election by leaking damaging information about Paul Manafort that led to Paul Manafort having to resign. Now, does anybody care that a Ukraine court ruled that? And I'm not saying it's a big deal because I personally don't care, but certainly by that same logic, that Ukrainian court ruling, the fact that it's weighing in on a U.S. election matter, calls into question the legitimacy of a future election. So the logic makes no sense. Adam Schiff is being Adam Schiff is being hyperbolic.
It's good for his show, I'm sure.
Yeah, okay. Lenny, you want to say something? Go ahead.
Look, Ukraine can do what they wish, but the President of the United States should not be leveraging foreign aid to get Ukraine to do his political bidding. And Adam Schiff's main point on all of this is that if the whistleblower hadn't have come forth, and if Congress hadn't have proceeded with this, then President Trump may have continued to do these activities, potentially to undermine the 2020 election in his favor. That was Adam Schiff's point. And the bottom line is, if things happen and you don't uncover it, it could have an impact on an election. That is what happened with Richard Nixon when his role in this wasn't really fully disclosed until after the 1972 election, and arguably the dirty tricks and the tactics he used could have impacted that election. So what Adam Schiff is saying is we needed to stop this in its tracks so that more damage isn't done.
Okay.
Well, and to
And
that
that's why
point,
One moment,
that is
Aaron.
all-
Amy, go
that
ahead.
is that's speculative, and it's argument from the House Democratic impeachment manager. It was not proven. That is why they wanted to, get the testimony of John Bolton and Mick Mulvaney. Bizarrely, they didn't ask for it when they had the opportunity on the House side. They wanted the Senate to be able to pull that trigger. But I think there's a big difference, and the American public see it, between what are the remedies for possible, misconduct by the President of the United States. One of them is an election, which is coming up in just a few months. Another, which I advocated and continue to do, well, I guess it's too late now, that censure, I think, would have been appropriate for what was uncovered with the transcript of the phone call. And with censure, you might have met a Nancy Pelosi standard last year, which is that it needs to be compelling and bipartisan. And you would have gotten, I think, Republican buy-in of a censure of the president, not using impeachment as a political death penalty for something that a lot of Americans
This
don't
whole
even
bipartisan thing is
understand.
really funny because this started in the White House. The actual complaint started on the call. There were several officials who the
The
House
complaint is from an
excuse me,
Obama
Amy, just
holdover
one
who's
second.
back at the CIA.
1 second. Okay, she brought in the CIA now. Here we go. Yeah, it's always a canard. This started back at the White House.
Bizarre.
There was a whistleblower complaint. There were people on that call, the way they tried to hide it. Now, that's fine. That may be all within the realm of executive privilege or whatever, but there were people calling it a drug deal, including John Bolton. We heard from Fiona Hill. We heard from Vindman. These are all very different people. They thought something was wrong, and they're part of the executive. So there's this bipartisan thing. It actually started in the White House.
Okay, Nathan, I want to ask you about this. There are people, of course, who are defending the president. Here's a close ally of the president, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. Let's listen to what he had to say.
They're on a crusade to destroy this man, and they don't care what they destroy in the process of trying to destroy Donald Trump. I do care. So to my Democratic colleagues, you can say what you want about me, but I'm covering up nothing. I'm exposing your hatred of this president to the point that you would destroy the institution.
So Lindsey Graham was
Have you
speaking
played his
at the-
clip from 1998 where he says complete opposite?
Yes,
Yeah, okay,
we know that. The president, at least that was in response to allegations that the White House is mounting a cover-up here. And the president's supporters are making the point that Democrats have been trying to unseat this president or cast a huge shadow over the legitimacy of his presidency since day one.
Shocker. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I think, guess what? Republicans tried to do the same thing with Barack Obama. And guess what? Republicans tried to do the same thing with Bill Clinton. I mean, welcome to America, guys. But that doesn't necessarily mean that an impeachment process is without validity. And, the reason this happened so quickly, I think, in terms of, we had, 2 years of the Mueller report. I mean, and I thought the White House handled the rollout of the Mueller report exceptionally well with Bill Barr and the redactions. And, there wasn't the sort of, everyone was really confused about what was in it. They still are. But with this, it was kind of open and shut. I was like, well, can you do us a favor? Can you look into the Bidens and then maybe you get your weapons? Nice country you got there.
That's not what he said, actually. That was not in the transcript, and that is
Well,
the
it's
whole
not a
point
transcript.
of
It's a partial
contention.
transcript. The real one's hidden, and when they're not allowed it,
Even
yada,
the-
yada, yada.
even the witnesses
Amy,
said that
I really like you, right? I
ellipses-
really like you, but your
I
talking
don't think
points
you
are from
do,
the
because I
back of
think
a
I pointed out
cornflake
to you
packet
that the
sometimes.
Senate
They have
camera
to
is not
evolve.
over
Okay, one
Mr.
at a time.
McConnell's
She's been saying
control.
this for months. Everyone's been saying the same thing for months. But talking points have to evolve along with facts. We know it's not a full transcript. Every White House correspondent knows this. It is an edited transcript at best. The full transcript is still in the in the secret computer,
All right.
and they won't release
That's
it.
not even
Just
right.
admit
You don't
it,
even
please.
Listen,
know
I want to
that.
get round the
You don't
table.
even
I want to
know
get
that.
round the
You
Because
don't
table.
I'd
even
like
know
to have
that.
a real argument.
Okay.
But when people just say it's a full transcript, it's just not true.
You don't even know that, but
Okay.
I think
Aaron,
Amy
you go
made
first, and then Amy afterwards.
I think
Lenny.
Amy made a great.
Yeah.
I think Amy made a great point before, which is that there are remedies beyond impeachment. There could have been censure. Actually, I advocated censure from the start because I do think it was inappropriate for Trump in a phone call with a foreign leader to bring up Joe Biden. But that doesn't mean you have to lead to the highest remedy possible, which is impeachment and removal from office, especially when, by the way, Donald Trump is committing far worse crimes. He just killed a leader of Iran, which is a war crime. He's imposed murderous sanctions on Iran and Venezuela and other countries that are killing people by denying them food and medicine. So I could tell you a long list of crimes that I think Donald Trump actually could be impeached for. The problem, though, here, and the reason why we have Ukraine-gate, is not because Donald Trump committed a threat to national security, which is a joke on its face, but because he went after another faction of the elite, Joe Biden. And in Washington, and unfortunately this redounds down to the press corps, people care more about protecting elites than they care about protecting people, both in this country and around the world. And one impact of all this hyper-focus on transcripts and dates and different officials' testimonies, is that it's overshadowing all the very real harm that Donald Trump is doing to the country. And I think just like Russiagate was a gift to Trump because it diverted focus from his actual crimes, so will Ukraine-gate as well. And it's unfortunate to see people in the press going along with it.
Okay, Amy, go ahead.
Point number one, the whistleblower was an Obama holdover. That's not a conspiracy. He was fired because he was leaking against the White House, and we have the whistleblower report as, sort of his, ultimate document. That's number one. Number two, as Aaron was just saying, if you read the transcript, the ellipses, that's been discussed, it was discussed in House congressional testimony, that there's nobody who sits down and writes it all out. There are different people who are putting it together, and even Donald Trump's opponents in that House congressional testimony said that it was basically the full transcript of the conversation. Those are just facts. Nathan may not like them, but at the end of the day, what this does is it diminishes the solemnity and seriousness of impeachment. It turns it into a circus, a political cudgel. The American people are losing interest. Adam Schiff has not made his point in getting 66 United States senators to agree with him.
67.
And when we talk about impeachment being subjective, in fact, the Constitution says that you impeach on high crimes and misdemeanors, and they set the bar so high that it requires 66 senators to agree so that we don't end up with just partisan mudslinging.
All right.
Welcome to America. That's not what impeachment is for.
Lenny.
Look, there's been a lot of talk about the president and the Democrats, but I think one of the real big issues here, the Republican Party on all of this, the Republican Party and the Republicans have been enabling behavior of Donald Trump since he ran for office. And in many ways, they have so lowered the bar on presidential behavior that it's no surprise that they're going to vote in lockstep to acquit him. So when you think about this, what's happened is that the Republicans have become acclimated to this behavior by Donald Trump. If you gave them truth serum, they would probably say, yes, he did everything that the Democrats have charged, okay? But how is that different in some ways, they would argue, from blowing up our alliances, okay? Yeah. From conducting foreign policy by tweet and impulse, by saying we should lock up his political opponents, by giving schoolyard insults to people all across the board. So for them, it's understandable why they don't think this is impeachable or why they don't think you should convict, because in effect they could say, how is this any different from the other things that he's done?
It's not the worst thing he's done.
Exactly. Lenny, on the question of presidential behavior, I mean, put this in perspective for us. There are many people who say, look, if you didn't impeach George W. Bush for lying to this country, lying to the world, taking the entire army to war, destroying a nation, leading to the deaths of up to 1 million people, destabilizing an entire region, what does impeachment mean?
Well, look, it's not fair to argue what George W. Bush did.
Yeah, but if we're looking at presidential behavior, I mean,
well, but yes,
that's whataboutism taken to,
right.
No, it isn't.
There's a difference between policy that you think is in the national interest, even if you are not completely forthcoming, because you could argue that Lyndon Johnson could have been impeached as well for the Gulf of Tonkin and the Vietnam War. But what makes this different is using the powers of the presidency to leverage a foreign government to investigate your potential
No.
opponent in the 2020 election, which then could have the impact
All right.
of undermining our election
No.
and our
What makes-
democracy, which is
No, what makes
fundamental
this
to who
different-
we are.
Okay, okay.
No,
What makes this different?
Okay,
Yes.
Aaron,
What
go
makes
ahead.
us different? What makes us different, and what really shows who we are, is the fact that unlike the in the case of the Iraq War, Democrats were complicit in George Bush's crime against humanity. So Democrats now are not going to be on board with impeaching a president over something that they're complicit in. In this case, Donald Trump went after another faction of the elite, a member of their party, and that is why they are so focused on this. By the way, to assume that they've proved their case, I think, is really a mistake. The only fact witness they have who spoke to Donald Trump about the investigations and the military funding that was frozen is Gordon Sondland. What did he actually say? He said that a link between the investigations and the freeze was only his presumption, and that Donald Trump never even told him that there was such a linkage. So basically, Gordon Sondland's presumption is just as good as Kurt Volker's assumption, another official, who said that there was no linkage. So we shouldn't presuppose that Democrats have proved their case. They haven't. And that's why I think it's just not very compelling.
Well, it's hard to prove your case when you're not allowed to gain access to the evidence, to the materials, and to witnesses, which
Yeah.
the White House has been withholding. Therefore, there is a second article of impeachment, which is obstruction of Congress.
Let me get to that very quickly with Amy. Amy, the president is effectively claiming rights of privilege, executive privilege, in
Not
preventing.
even claiming that, they're just not giving them.
Yeah, they're not passing these documents to the Senate. They're also blocking people from testifying. If the president is so confident that there's no case against him, why not give them all the documents? Allow all his staffers to give testimony. What's he afraid of?
I think, like Senator Mitch McConnell, he wants this process to be over. So why would he be giving Democrats more opportunities for hours-long campaign
Yeah, but it
commercials?
exonerates him, and he believes that
you know,
he's
and
innocent.
being paid for by the free. But the point about executive privilege, and there's certainly a lot of legal dispute over the second article of impeachment, which is obstruction of Congress. Is it obstruction of Congress to exercise executive privilege?
They haven't.
Possibly, but that's something that should be litigated in court and decided there, not launched as an impeachment article that if we were to use that basis, let's go back to President Obama and his Attorney General, Eric Holder, who withheld documents, who lied to Congress, who obstructed their investigation of Fast and Furious, and in fact was found in contempt of Congress for all of those activities. We have every president asserts executive privilege when it has, it comes to their chief of staff, their national security advisor, having conversations about potential policy and actions, and sometimes that's appropriate and sometimes it's not. And when it's not, the appropriate path to take here is through the courts and have the courts decide not to drag the whole entire country through a flawed impeachment process from the very beginning.
Okay, Nathan, very quickly, where does it go?
And they
to from
chose
here?
not to do that. They could have done
Well-
that, but they chose not to. I think it's a very
They
important
chose
point.
not to.
I mean, where does it go from here? Obviously, we've got the president's case starting Saturday. The president said, hey, it's Death Valley on Saturday when it comes to TV ratings, so they're going to save up most of their arguments for Monday. They're not sitting on Sunday. But I think the next thing is whether the Democrats have actually feel they've done enough and the White House rebuttal is not enough, so that the vote, if it comes down and if there is a vote, they can call witnesses and more documents. That would probably turn the temperature up from almost freezing on this impact to maybe a low simmer.
Okay. That's for next week. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.